This is Robert Sapolsky, and you're listening to Father-Offspring Interviews.
Greetings. Welcome back to Father-Offspring Interviews. Before we get going on questions,
Well, just to try to have all our facts straight, the other week I was flailing with a quote, which I not only got it wrong, but I got it wrong in attributing it most probably to William Blake. Instead, as a number of people pointed out, it's John Milton, Paradise Lost. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. So, got that sorted out. You will recall also from talking about morning versus evening people, chronotypes, how people in the field refer to morning people as larks, evening people as owls. And I ventured that I had no association of larks in the morning and instead think of doves, morning doves. And a number of people have pointed out that it's the other morning. And in fact, there's all sorts of Celtic folk music about larks in the morning. Finally, someone I think advanced the interesting hypothesis. You will recall that evening people, the owls, are on the average less healthy than morning people. And the person pointed out that they probably are less healthy because they have to put up with chipper morning people all the time. So that's it for the news.
and we learn something new about homophones every day here. All right, our first question is from Reino from New Zealand, who says, is there evidence to suggest that pet ownership, especially owning dogs and cats, is an honest signal to prospective mates that a person would make a good parent? Could this have been a potential driver of dog and or cat domestication?
Yes, indeed. Sort of, only at certain times and places. Okay, most polls show, I don't know, 40, 60, whatever percent of Americans who have dogs as pets consider them to be family members. They are cuddled, they are cared for, they are intertwined with our lives. In the process of getting ready for this, I discovered an astonishing statistic, which is in the United States, the average per capita expenditure on food for a pet dog each day is greater than the expenditure for food for 2.8 billion of Earth's humans, about 30%. And the average expenditure for medical care by way of veterinarians per capita, again, roughly 1/3 of Earth's humans are getting less money spent on healthcare than our pets. So, given that, we're going to be talking about contemporary circumstances of pets, because I think we could probably all agree 20,000 years ago, nobody was being attracted to somebody who had some weird wolf rubbing up against them. Instead, this is a much more contemporary phenomenon. So, Regula, you will recall from 39 years ago when I was first noting Mommy, not only was she incredibly cute, she had an incredibly cute Sheltie Pomeranian dog named Frosty. So that was definitely a pull. It was only later that I realized she also had a yellow-naped Amazonian parrot who I was terrified of because he hated me. Okay, how about actual science done on this? One of the pioneers, and this literature, just to start off, is 99% at least on straight individuals. So, one of the pioneers is Helen Fisher of Rutgers University, anthropologist who died somewhat recently. One of the pioneers of studying what attracts people to others. And in one of her studies, she and her cadre went to Match.com and looked at hundreds of thousands of entries of what people were looking for in someone they would be attracted to, someone they would swipe up or down or whichever way you do it. One of the things that came out of it very significantly, more women than men noted a desire for someone who liked dogs. More dog owners were sought out than cat owners. And finally, the type of dog. Rottweilers did not get a whole lot of attention as compared to, say, Labradors or puppies. So that they also showed that when you insert a dog into somebody's description or not, you do what they refer to as a transition of someone, a potential male partner, from cad to dad. cad, someone who's basically only interested in a one night stand and then disappears, to someone you can already imagine telling the kids about the tooth fairy or something. Experimental studies, field experiments have been done where a Confederate, a member of the study, would be planted with or without a pet dog, a pet adorable dog, and looking at people's interactions with them. And what you see is, by having a dog, significant increase in the likelihood that strangers of either sex, and either sex of the person with the dog, increased likelihood that the person would converse with them, that the person would smile at them, the person would have the dog as a centerpiece of the conversation. What I thought was most interesting was in one version of these studies showing that if a guy is walking around with a dog and talks to a woman, if he has a dog, he is more likely to get her phone number than if he doesn't have the dog. Now, there are two major confounds in this literature. First off, who are the controls? As I've been referring to, logically, someone without a dog rather than someone with a dog. In one of the studies, the two control groups, one was the person was holding a stuffed teddy bear, and in the other, the person was holding a potted plant. And I dare say this is not a neutral stimulus. I think a lot of people would find it fairly alarming to find somebody standing there with a teddy bear or a potted plant. The other control that I noted was not done in the literature was, okay, have a dog, and the person is more likely to give you a phone number. They didn't follow up and check and see if it was a real phone number, as opposed to, Chad, sure, here's my phone number, Murray Hole 70700, and on your way, and we'll talk, okay? Anyone who lived in New York City in the 1960s will recognize the phone number Murray Hill 70700 from the radio. So those were two controls that were missing there. What's the attraction? Lots of people see someone and their interactions with their dog as a surrogate for what sort of parent they're going to be. Similar to sort of the jaded concept, you want to know whether this guy or woman you're sort of getting more involved with is going to be nice to you. How do they treat the service person in a restaurant? Because that's a very good predictor. Okay, so all of this, however, is stinking of weirdness. Yet again, weird, westernized, educated, industrialized, democratic, rich countries. These are not your average humans. All of these studies come from the United States or England or Canada or France or Australia. What's going on in the rest of the world? Very different cultural views about dogs, which is they are not necessarily viewed as members of the family. Depending on the culture, they are viewed as suitable for work. They are viewed as unclean. They are viewed as a decent meal. So all of this is a literature on westernized dog owners. So this brings us back to the question, though, are we looking, at least within weird populations, are we now looking at evolution going to play out here? And I think that may be the case in two ways. First off, this is suggesting that there's selection for dog owners, especially cute dogs, dog owners passing on more copies of their genes. What we've also seen is there was selection for Labradors passing on more copies of their genes than Rottweilers. But what this suggests overall is if you come back in 20,000 years and go to America, like 50% of the biomass is going to be made up of like golden retrievers named Daisy or Max wearing bandanas around their necks. You will note, though, there's one problem with this, which is if everybody winds up having a cute golden retriever, it carries no signaling value. We have this evolutionary phenomenon of frequency dependent selection. As long as only a subset of individuals have this great, adorable dog, when it gets to the point that like everybody has one, it carries no more value. So, what we may well be seeing 20,000 years from now is selection is now going in the opposite direction against people who have dogs as pets and against golden retrievers and Labradors, and who knows which pets will be the signals of mating desirability, maybe army ants, or all the millions and millions of descendants of Mu Deng, who by then will have been bred to be able to sing lullabies. But nonetheless, I think we see in some cultures something like a dog of the right kind in the right circumstance is indeed a mating attractant.
Next, Brad from California says, what might be the function of consciousness in the absence of free will?
Well, Brad, this is alluding to the fact that I think that consciousness has nothing to do with free will. And for that reason, I avoid the subject. And the other reason is I don't understand any of the neurobiology of consciousness. It is enormously confusing and unclear to me. Nonetheless, consciousness. Consciousness in the anesthesiologist sense of are you conscious or are you in a coma or whatever, consciousness in an everyday sense. Excuse me, are you conscious that your foot is on fire? But the consciousness we're talking about is the subjective awareness of the external stimuli and the internal stimuli that are impinging on you and what effects they're having. Okay, so let me just do my song and dance once more about why this has nothing to do with free will. Oh, you make a conscious decision. Free will has nothing to do with it. You, for example, just to cite a frequent scenario, you have a police officer and there's somebody, dangerous individual around the corner there, and they may or may not have a gun, and the person leaps out and they're a them. They are an outgroup member. And in a fraction of a second, the police officer mistakes the person's cell phone for a handgun and shoots them. This is purely in the implicit realm of non-conscious actions, and you may have no control over that. Conscious domain. Now you have the police officer and they apprehend this person who may or may not have just committed a crime, and they're questioning them. And because this person is one of them, an outgroup member, without you being aware of it at all, you conclude this person looks kind of sketchy and you arrest them. A conscious decision driven by your implicit biases, an unconscious decision to shoot in a tenth of a second, driven by implicit biases, in both cases without free will. All right, so we've just ruled that out of free will, but what are the advantages of consciousness? For one thing, it allows you to have a cogent conversation about the advantages of consciousness, but it also facilitates learning. It facilitates learning because it allows you to be aware of feedback and aware of your learning strategy. Great example of this, classic neuropsychological test of executive function, of set shifting, called the Wisconsin card sorting test. And this is one where you were sorting cards by some sort of criterion and you don't know which. For example, shown here, we've got the card at the bottom, which you'll see consists of two red pluses, four cards on top. And notice they differ by color, by number, by shape. And you ask the person, that card on the bottom, which one does it have the greatest relationship to? Which is it most similar to of the four cards up on top? So you look at the first one and you say, well, they're both red. And you look at the second one and you say they're both two items. And you look at the fourth one and they're both pluses. And you guess at one. And all you're told is right or wrong. Huh, wrong. Okay, I guess it was not number two. Let's try number four. Nope, that one's wrong. Also, three, no way. Let's try number one. Number one, great. They tell you you're right. Ah, we're going for colors. Then they give you another example of that and go for colors again. You're right. Go for colors again. You're right. Off you go. And the whole point of the test is at some point, they shift the criterion from, say, color to number. And you go for the red one and they tell you, no, you're wrong. Uh, damn, are we doing shapes? Let me try shape. No, you're wrong. Let me do number. You're right. Ah, we've shifted to, now we're looking at numbers. You do a whole series of numbers. And what the test is about is If you have some sort of neuropsychological limits, neuropsychological damage, you may have trouble with the set shifting. You start off at the beginning with, oh, we're matching for color. And even though 20 of those in there, they keep telling you, no, actually, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. You can't shift away from color to check out shape or check out number. That's a standard test of all sorts of aspects of brain damage, of cognitive function. And what to tap into when you see someone who is perseverating, they don't shift sets from what's no longer working to what is now working. This tells you there's dysfunction in the frontal cortex. We know all about that by now. All sorts of dementias begin to pop up there. That's great. So that's the human test. There's a rat equivalent of the Wisconsin card sorting test, and it's done with shapes and colors, and you're rewarding or you're not giving rewards to rats based on, and they could learn to match. What's the critical difference? A typical human version of the test is 20 minutes long. Within 20 minutes, you know if the person can identify what's the first correct answer and the first category, and then you can find out, are they capable of set shifting? When you do it with a rat, it takes weeks to months of training. Same thing with a monkey. We're smarter than them. But let's deconstruct what the smarter is about here. We have consciousness. We are able to do something that the rat can't do. Right when you've been rolling along wonderfully with color, right, color, right, color, right, color, wrong, wrong. What do you mean you flail around? The rat flails around randomly. What we have consciousness working for is to allow us to now systematically go after what the match is. You say, okay, so that didn't work for color. Let's try number. I am consciously aware that I was using the strategy of color and suddenly it didn't work. So let's see if number does. You have consciousness. It allows you to have the most efficient executive function. In addition, consciousness allows you to have insight into some of your unconscious things. You got to say right at the beginning, okay, we're doing color, but remember, red is my favorite color and I totally love red. So be conscious that I'm going to get stuck on red sometimes. So be really careful about that. What is consciousness doing for you? It's allowing you to be aware of what strategy you have taken, what strategy is no longer working, what the new one is, set shifting, and with any luck, to be aware of some of your implicit biases that may make your answering less effective, less efficient.
Finally, Victor from Brazil says, I read recently that a species of Galapagos tortoise that went extinct 150 years ago has been brought back from extinction. Is this similar to how dire wolves were brought back last year and the plan to do the same for woolly mammoths?
No, it is not similar, but I'm so glad this came up because finally some good news. First, dire wolves went extinct 10, 12,000 years ago. And in what was last season's news, de-extinction of dire wolves, not actually making dire wolves, but something with a lot of DNA from dire wolves, took fossil remains of dire wolves, extracted DNA, figured out which genes in there were uniquely different from the dog genome, cut them out, switched them in there, had a surrogate dog carry it to pregnancy. And now we have kind of semi dire wolves growing up who are incredibly adorable. And that's going to be the same strategy for bringing back mammoths. This one is different, though, and has got to do with tortoises in Galapagos Islands in the Pacific, just off the coast of Ecuador. One of the places on Earth, I don't know, personally, in addition to the Serengeti, where you just look around and you feel so grateful that life turned out this way and that you get to see it. An amazing place. And all this concerns the tortoises in the Galapagos, about 20 islands in the Galapagos, five of them traditionally occupied by people, and all of them occupied by tortoises, big, giant Galapagos tortoises. So, What we have here is another version of Darwin discovering the mechanisms of evolution. And the much more famous version of it are the finches in Galapagos. Darwin gets there. Every single island has a little subspecies of finch, and they're all a little bit different. They have beaks that are a little bit shorter on this island or a little bit rounder on that island. And it turns out each island's subspecies of finch is really, really perfectly adapted for being able to eat the seeds there. Aha, says Darwin. That's amazing. There must have been a single ancestral form of finch that got there from the mainland and populated all the islands. And what's been going on since is in each island, the ones who happen to have the optimally shaped beak have been leaving more copies of their genes. And now, a gazillion generations later, this island has a different subspecies. Whoa, that's amazing, says Darwin. They're selected naturally. I know, I'll call it natural selection. So the radiation of the different finch species adapted for the specific ecosystems in each island. Same thing with the tortoises. He just happened not to pay as much attention to that. Turns out each island has a different type, a different subspecies of Galapagos tortoise. And one of the most exciting differences is the shape of their shell. Bunch of the subspecies have perfectly round shells. A bunch of them instead have saddle shaped. And what's that about? It turns out there is a controversy in the Galapagos tortoise shell community as to what's the adaptive advantage of the different shapes. One version with the saddle shaped one, you've got this edge goes up higher, allowing the tortoise to lift its head up higher than with the dome shaped one, lift its head up higher. And on that island, there's more plants that have good stuff to eat this far off the ground. So that was great. Whereas the domed ones are chomping away down at the bottom where the good stuff is. So that's one interpretation. The other, a paper I saw, explores the disaster that can befall a Galapagos tortoise if it gets overturned on its back. And what happens there is it's there struggling, and the paper points out the logical problem, which is the tortoise may get stuck there and starve to death or something. But the paper weirdly also pointed out another problem, which is by getting upended like that, flipped over, the tortoise is going to lose mating opportunities. Presumably, all these other circumstances where some other tortoise comes by and says, whoa, hey, Chad, have you been working out? Chad, second time today. Have you? And why don't we go? Oh, you can't because you're flailing there on your back. So there's the mating opportunities lost. But the point was the terrains and the soil on the different islands. On some of the islands, it's easier to flip yourself over if you have a dome shape. On others, if you have a saddle shape. Okay, so that's the deal with Galapagos tortoises. So now we focus in on one particular island in the Galapagos called Floriana. Throughout the 19th century, whaling ships stopped at all sorts of the islands there, including Floriana, where something really disturbing and ghastly would happen to the tortoises there, which is they were hunted. They were hunted for meat. Tortoise meat apparently tastes great if you've been sailing on a ship eating hardtack, salt tack, moldy bread, whatever for months on end. So great, let's hunt Galapagos tortoises for meat. An elaboration on this, which is a Galapagos tortoise, once you capture it and toss it in the hold of the ship, can go about a year without eating or drinking. And here's the really ghastly part. What they would do is flip them over on their backs and pile them up, a whole pile of the tortoises stuck like that for months and months. And the 1st of November, let's get the one on top there, slaughter him for meat. December, let's get the next one. Totally distressing picture there. So lots and lots of whaling ship related hunting of the tortoises. and the numbers throughout all the islands started plunging. And by the last century, they were endangered on virtually every island there. Except good news, by about the 1970s, they began to have protection on the islands there. By then, it was not protecting the tortoises from whalers, it was protecting them from the rats and the cats and the dogs that had been brought there by humans who were eating tortoise eggs and predating baby little tortoises and stuff. So, good news on all those islands, the numbers of tortoises have been coming back, except on Floriana, because back in the 19th century, they were hunted to extinction. By the mid 19th century, there were no longer any tortoises on Floriana. Okay, jump now to a few years ago, and some tortoise ecologists were doing some expedition on another island in the Galapagos, the furthest away possible. Floriana is way at the southeast corner. This other island, way furthest west, 50 miles away, called Isabel, which has its own subspecies of tortoise, which yawn everyone had known about forever. So these tortoise ecologists were climbing around on the side of volcanoes there, and they discovered in one valley off of one of the volcanoes a different subspecies of tortoise that no one had ever seen before. It did not look like the resident tortoises, did not look like tortoises on any other island there. What's the deal? So they got blood samples from all these tortoises and did genomic sequencing, and back came a DNA sequence on these tortoises that no one had ever seen before. They were genetically distinct from all of the other islands, including the ones surrounding them on this island. What is up with that? So the researchers at this point go snooping around in old whaling museums and natural history museums and get fossils of various types of Galapagos tortoises, including extinct Floriana tortoises, get some DNA from them, sequence them, and whoa, it turns out 50 miles away, this weirdo little population of unique tortoises are descendants of Floriana tortoises, descendants who've been interbreeding with the neighboring resident ones. Totally amazing. This is completely exciting. They sampled 1,600 tortoises there and found 85 of them who were Floriana descendants. So what do? They grab 30 of them and they airlift them to the main Charles Darwin Tortoise Reproduction Center on another one of the islands there. And they got them there. They've got all these hybrids who are carrying Floriana genes, each one with different Floriana genes or partially overlapping that they inherited. And what do you start doing now? You start breeding them for purity to bring back the Floriana genotype. How do you do this? Okay, barbaric DNA genetics here, which various professors of mine will be turning over in their graves in terms of simplification. We're going to ignore heterozygosity, homozygosity. The terms are not familiar. Ignore this whole thing. So here's what we got. So you got these two tortoises, and suppose there's two genes in question, and each one of the genes, there's the Floriana version or the resident tortoise version from that Isabel Island. So you get the first one who's a hybrid. This one's got big A, got the Floriana big A version of the gene, but they've got the resident tortoise little b version of the gene. Meanwhile, that one has the little resident tortoise version of A, but they've got the Floriana version of B. And once you ignore details like what sex they are, you breed them with each other, and you're going to get one that's a pure version of little a and little b, just like the pure resident tortoises. You're going to get hybrids, another big A, little b, a little b, and a big a little a, and a big B. And you also now get an offspring that's a big A and a big B. That's the pure Floriana version of those two genes. Meanwhile, in the lab next door, they've been looking at Floriana versus resident genes C and D. And thanks to the same scheme, they've now got a pure Floriana C and D, and now mate the A and B with the C, and you're going to get eventually a pure A, B, C, D, and just do this. And it turns out the intergenerational time, given how slowly these guys breed, do this for 500 years. And in principle, you may eventually get a genetically pure Floriana tortoise again. Totally amazing. But what can you do in the meantime? You can reintroduce these hybrids back into the Galapagos Islands, back to Floriana, and conduct a huge natural selection experiment, which is to see, dump a whole bunch of them that have partial Floriana genomes, and you'll see selection occur all over again, hopefully, that will reconstitute eventually the pure Floriana genome. Totally cool, totally exciting. This is going to be amazing. There was one problem though, which is by now Floriana was overrun with rats and dogs and cats. So in the last few years, they did this massive eradication program of all of them. Finally, Floriana is pure. It's been cleared of all of those. There's about 600 of these Floriana enriched hybrids. And by now, 300 of them are sort of big enough that in a couple of months, they're going to introduce them to Floriana. They're going to bring them back to the island there. Okay, so this is fabulous. This is totally exciting. This is like good ecological news. There's still one final question, though, which is how did descendants of Floriana tortoises get from over here across 50 miles of ocean to wind up on this side of this volcano? And the scientists think they know how. And totally great, ironic explanation in the 1830s, one of those whaling ships that apparently had a couple of hundred of these Floriana tortoises stacked up there in the hold broke up on the rocks of Isabel Island and sank, and the ship broke apart, and a subset of the tortoises swam to this other island. They swam to Isabel Island, and here we are 150 years later, they're hybrid descendants who made it out of one of those whaling boats and got to this island. So totally cool story. This is great. So this is feel good. Nonetheless, this is feel good. There's still global warming, and there's still Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan, and there's still 2.8 billion people out there who are getting less food money spent on them each day than we spend on our pet dogs. But nonetheless, at least in this one lone outpost in the Pacific, it's been 150 years since tortoises have walked there, and they're about to come back. So in that little sliver of earth, that's good news.
And on that note, that is it for episode 78. I'm Offspring Share Sapolsky, and thanks for your continued support of science and the beard.